You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast produced by Veteran Strategies and featuring conversations with fascinating and impactful men and women who have shaped our world, our communities, and our history. My name is Robert Vane, Principal of Veteran Strategies, and your host for our discussion. You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, an Indiana-based public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Garmon Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and NFP, a national insurance broker with strong local content. Our podcast is featured on the All Indiana Podcast Network in partnership with Wish TV. You may find Leaders and Legends at allindianapodcastnetwork.com. Thinking of starting a podcast or need to host a public meeting? Let Leaders and Legends LLC be your partner as you look for new ways to communicate your message. Please contact Chris Spangle or me at leadersandlegends.net. And as always, all our podcast interviews are dedicated to the legacy and generosity of P.E. McAllister. Thank you for joining us on the Leaders and Legends podcast. Our guest today is, and to say this is a thrill is a vast understatement. Our guest today is a sports writer and book co-author, television commentator, an all-around funny man, if I may say that, Bob Ryan. He was formerly with the Boston Globe. You have seen him on television. You have heard him on the radio. If you're smart, you've read some of his books, which include Drive, the Story of My Life, that he co-authored with Larry Bird. And you follow him on social media, and we're going to ask him about social media here soon. He has a terrific, a fun, very engaging social media account. Bob Ryan, thank you so much for coming on the Leaders and Legends podcast.
Oh, my pleasure to be here.
And I need to thank Bob Kravitz, who is a previous guest who gave me the courage to reach out to Mr. Ryan to ask him to come on. Thank you so much, Bob. Mr. Ryan, you have a fabulous career. You have done so much. We're going to try to get to as much of it as we possibly can. Let me start with a couple of things. We try not to make a temporal connection to the podcast because they're not really posted in order. But it's April 16th, so let's do some recent news. The hometown Indiana Fever just selected Caitlin Clark with the number one pick in the WNBA draft. You were very active in commentating about the recent women's NCAA tournament. What do you think about Caitlin Clark and what she will do for the league and Indianapolis?
I wonder how she gets through the day. Sometimes she's become a larger-than-life celebrity. She is a name that has now transcended the idea of women's basketball. And when you're appearing on Saturday Night Live, you're an undergraduate at the University of Iowa, which is what she is if you want to get down to the basics. This is a phenomenon quite unlike any other that I know in this. And it's really amazing how her name has become so familiar to people and what she's done to elevate the sport. And I think secondarily put a spotlight on some of those who have come before her, and reminding people that there have been some wonderful women basketball players, and that her goal is to rank among them. And until she plays in the WNBA, she won't be able to do that. Anyway, it's a phenomenon. It's an amazing thing, and I'm not awe of her, but I'm certainly impressed with the way she has carried herself through all this. And what you hear about her at home, that she's just one of the girls and all that, it's good. But boy, she's the right person in the right place at the right time, because she has the personality to handle this, apparently.
And is there some sort of parallel? I'm waiting for it to be written here in Indianapolis. I'm sure it will be. The Indiana Pacers, I believe, were the first NBA team to give a contract to a female basketball player. That was Ann Meyer, who eventually ended up marrying Don Drysdale. And so Indiana, in terms of its basketball, I know you're Boston, East Coast. Is that one of the reasons why you think Caitlin is such a good fit, because of Indiana's love for the game?
First of all, I have to offer a gentle correction.
Give it to me.
The first female drafted by the NBA was Denise Long of Iowa by the Warriors. And the pick was back in the late 60s. And the pick was immediately voided by Commissioner Walter Kennedy. And so let's get that straight. Denise Long played in the 6-person game in Iowa, was the all-time scorer. Anyway, and then Ann Myers, yes, similarly, but after the fact. Now, Indiana. Indiana, of course, is synonymous with basketball. It's an appropriate place, of course. And now I must say that Iowa was the most appropriate state for Caitlin Clark to emerge, it being one of the last 2 states to abandon the 6-person game in favor of the 5-person game because it was still popular there. Mm-hmm. Anyway, but Iowa basketball has very long history for women, one of the best premier ones in the United States. But in terms of basketball in general, obviously, Indiana is synonymous with the sport.
Is there, and I don't want to overstate it, because the circumstances are different in a lot of ways, but so much of the discussion about Caitlin Clark is how she can elevate the game. And by elevate the game, make it more popular, make it more lucrative, make it more impactful. Then you're right. There have been so many wonderful players who came before Cheryl Swoops. And obviously we're fond of Cheryl Miller here in Indiana because of her brother. And the list goes Cheryl Swoops. The list goes on and on. But thinking back to 1979, 1980, Larry Bird came in the league with Magic Johnson. And that is a watershed event in the history of the NBA. Do you think that Caitlin, in her own way, at their own level, that this is a watershed moment for the WNBA?
Well, right now, it appears it has every possibility of being that. Now, we have to see actually how it plays out. Right away, there are skeptics within their own female community about how dominant she will be or how great she will be. You know that the UConn alumni are already on record as disparaging her, namely Sue Bird and Diana Taurasi, who have gone out of their way to throw cold water on this whole idea. So that's going to be interesting. And I think there could be some resentment. And I'll give you an example of a person who came into I'll answer your original question, but I want to give you an idea. There was one phenomenon that entered the NBA and met hostility in his own team because there was a resentment about his popularity as well as his nature of his game. And that was Pete Maravich, who did not have a blissful life with the Atlanta Hawks and was eventually traded to New Orleans, where he finally felt comfortable. And his teammates did not make life as good for him as it should have been. They were resentful.
Why were they resentful?
Because, well, number one, he was white and the players in question were black. Number two, he was flamboyant and his game was appealing to fans, but maybe not as appealing to high skilled players. They didn't seem to get it with him. And that's that. We have that historical precedence. It appears that there's going to be, she'll be a target. There will be extreme defensive pressure. She'll be a target by the other teams. Now, how her teammates are going to greet her, the one thing the teammates should like, and in fact, this was actually true of Maravich, but not, was she's a passer. When she crosses midcourt, she's thinking shoot, but I'm going to say this, and I just categorically, I've stated this, and I've presented this to people who have basketball opinions I respect, and they have agreed with me. So the following statement sounds hyperbolic, but I am stating it as my firm belief. I have never, and I've always tried to be judicious with the uses of words, always and never. I have never seen a basketball player of either sex who was better spying the floor as she comes up court and making the long pass while in transit. She's not an outlet passer a la Wesley Unsolder, Bill Walton. There's no female that I've ever seen that does that, okay? Maybe one will do someday, throw the baseball pass from the other end of the court. But sure. What she does, as well as anybody I have ever seen, which includes Larry Bird, which includes any guard you can name, and Bird was very good at this, is spot cutters above her as far as 40 or 50 feet away and throw them perfect places, placements right in their hands for the layup. I have never seen anybody better at this than Caitlin Clark. So if she can, and there's no reason why she won't transport. This is a very transferable talent. Nobody can stop that. That's something a gift that she has. There's no known defense for that, unless you're going to tackle her in the backcourt. That's about it. So I want to give her, she is extraordinary passer. I would think her teammates are going to love to play with her. You would like to think. And if they can put any resentment about how much money she's making, what endorsements she's got, what public appearances she's making, and just concentrate on her as a basketball teammate, then I think the team will thrive.
You will be warmed on. The Indianapolis Star had the footage, but it's also on social media where at least 3 of her teammates were at the draft party at the field house last night, Gamebridge Fieldhouse, and they jumped up and cheered. So I think the teammates understand what's coming. Very quick follow-up question.
Good to hear.
Oh, yeah. The city's gone crazy, as I'm sure you can imagine. But follow-up question, do you think those UConn players would have had the same attitude if Ms. Clark was a Husky?
They've already, I think it was Brianna, one of them said that, Brianna Stewart, that she would take Paige Beckers first in the draft. So they're Husky. No, seriously.
Substitute for loyalty.
Were she available? She's not in the draft. But were she available, they would have taken Paige Beckers. I sense a little Hoosier, a little Husky bias there. They're digging in. Well, Stewart did. Bird dug in. No, relented. But I said Stewart. But Taurasi dug in. Anyway, I think they would have been more accommodating were she a Husky, yes.
Another event happened in the last few days, and that is the passing of O.J. Simpson. As from a sports culture perspective, I'm old enough. I was born in '67. I'm a lifelong Dolphins fan, and we'll get to that here in a second. But I remember O.J. Simpson playing, and he was phenomenal. But from a sports culture perspective, what does O.J. mean, and his passing mean to America?
He became a flashpoint dividing the black and white America, unlike anything in my lifetime. We all know what happened, and in terms of the announcement of the verdict, and the fact that by and large Black America cheered, and by and large white America booed and cringed, and it was that simple. And the trial was co-opted by Johnny Cochran, who, in a brilliant piece of lawyering for his client, managed to have everybody forget that we're talking about a murder here, and he turned it into a thing about police harassment, and which of course was preposterous, since OJ was one of the most favored citizens. Was coddled by the entire police force, even though they had to answer calls of distress from his late wife at the house. Anyway, to have a star of that magnitude involved in double murder was I don't know if we can draw any parallel at all. And I remember that night, and it would be trying to get, like most fans, sports fans, I had a total positive image of OJ until that night in question. And I was covering the NBA Finals. I was in New York, and I never saw the second half of the game because everyone else in America, I was hovered watching the screen and the chase. We were all there. I don't know, only a very small segment of the media who were there stayed out in the court to watch the game. Probably the only people who did were the writers from New York and Houston.
Did you know OJ at all? Did you get to meet him?
Never met OJ. I had a positive feeling. First of all, I admired his play, of course. Right. Loved the Hertz commercial. And he had projected himself into this crossover figure. I'm not black, I'm OJ, quote unquote. Right. And he was likable. And I knew people who did. My colleague, Will McDonough, the great football, great all-around writer, knew him and liked him very much, had worked with him on the set and TV, and very much liked OJ. And I remember watching that chase saying, my God, that's OJ. What's going on? I was cheering for him. So what's going on? Because obviously we didn't know any details. All that we knew that they were chasing him, and we didn't know the details that have come out about what happened that night. But what's the parallel? And I don't know what parallel there is. I'm thinking of the Lindbergh trial, but Lindbergh wasn't on trial. It was Richard Hauptmann. And I'm trying to think of a celebrity linked with a huge crime like that. And that's the only one that comes to mind to that level, and that I can think of, is the Lindbergh trial. And it went into circumstances were completely different.
Agreed. The other question I want to ask you is, very quickly before we move on, because I want to talk a lot about your career and the things you've witnessed and the people with whom you've spoke. But social media, I'm on Twitter, or X, because I do public relations and speech writing for a living. And so it makes sense for me to be on it. I find it to be a lot of fun, and a lot of people, quite frankly, bitch about it, either before Elon Musk or after. What is your take on social media, and why have you decided to be so fun, so proactive about it, so engaging with the people who follow you?
It's a source of amusement to me, and I try. You don't take it seriously until you do, until something really comes up that you have to set the record straight. I'm being very pompous here. I use it to educate at times. I use it to pontificate. I use it to show off. I love certain topics that are presented. Like name, for example, one of the ones you get almost daily. Name a song that has the certain, whether a word, certain word in the title or the lyrics. And I like to show off my extensive musical knowledge, and I won't shy away from that. There's certain harmless topics such as that. They'll show a picture of some food and what goes with this, or yes or no. I like to play with that one. Just a public citizen. I have to play with that. But there are some times you get, and you get all kinds of sports comparisons, evaluations, and stuff. I like to show off. I like to participate. I like to be heard. It's a way of passing the time every day. It's something that I enjoy. And if
you have to do a mea culpa, like you just did with Lou Gehrig,
right? Exactly.
You have fun with that too.
Sure. I always said that the easiest columns to write were the apology columns, and they were always fun. And making fun of yourself and saying, how could I have said that? And oh my God, and who broke into stuff, and my computer and wrote my name down and put that stupid thought in. Oh yeah. And it shows people that you're human and you're fallible, and you know that, and you're not trying to pretend that you know everything. Although there are certain topics of which I think I do know most of everything, but kidding aside, but I've enjoyed it. And it's funny, before I ever got into it, my sports editor, Joe Sullivan, when in the fledgling days of Twitter, when I wasn't on it yet, said, you'd be good at it. And I didn't pay attention, but I finally reluctantly got put up, got an account, and I found out that I had fun with it, and I've enjoyed it ever since.
And there's a terrific cadre of, I'm going to say, not older, previous generation sports writers who are on X, who make it fun. The other person there's plenty of names, but the other person who comes to mind is Peter Vesey, who's on quite a bit. You are listening to the Leaders and Legends podcast. Our guest today is award-winning and very gracious sports columnist Bob Ryan. Bob was born in I'll just leave it blank, in Trenton, New Jersey. And I'm interested in, what was your first sports memory?
First sports memory that I can say, I'm not positive. One for sure is Carl Erskine striking out, how many was it? 14 to set the World Series record in 53 to break Howard Emke's record of 13. It since, of course, has gone up to 17 with Bob Gibson. That I do remember that. And I like to think I watched the game of Bobby Thompson's home run, but I can't. It was 5. I can't verify that. But I remember being aware of Erskine. And the next thing would be LaSalle winning the NCAA championship in 54, because one of my neighbors went to LaSalle at the time, and it was a big deal. They were celebrating, so I do remember that. And of course, I remember anyway. So I'll start with that. Those are the early legitimate memories that I have.
We should note again, to make a connection to a current event, that Mr. Carl Erskine passed away earlier today.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Wow. I once received. I have in my possession a wonderful thank you letter that he wrote me and it wasn't about him. It was about that I wrote. I was writing about old ballparks in 1985. I was commissioned to go to visit old ballparks on the 75th anniversary of the original Comiskey Park. And he loved the story that he saw, and he sent me a gracious. He lived in Indiana, of course, right? And he was a bank president at one point, right? Or at least he was an official, and before he retired fully. I guess everybody loved Oisk, as they used to say in Brooklyn. Oisk.
He was very much beloved. I tried to get him on the podcast a couple of times, but he was sick, and I didn't want to be in a situation where he felt like he had to, quote unquote, try too hard. He had other things.
By the way, we had a sad day yesterday. Ken Holtzman passed away.
Yeah, former baseball player.
And as my good friend and collaborator Bill Chuck pointed out, he, not Sandy Koufax, is the all-time winning Jewish left-hander. Or Jewish pitcher, period. So there you go.
So who are you going to take in the draft, Holtzman?
Yeah, I would take Sandy, but I'm just saying, how's that on it? 2 no-hitters.
Did you? That's right. Did what?
Koufax had 4, including a perfect game.
And was there someone who you read as a kid or you got into your teenage years that pushed you into the sports writing realm?
Locally, there was a guy who was the omniscient presence at all high school events named Joe Logue, L-O-G-U-E, from the Trenton Trentonian. And he was the local seer that you paid attention to. But the answer is very simple. Jim Murray, the late, great Jim Murray in Los Angeles Times in the time of syndicated columnist. And I read him in the Philadelphia Inquirer, which is where he was syndicated, among other places. And I was enraptured by Jim Murray, although I do not feel that I patterned my style after him. He was a true inspiration. The other one, he was an idol, Frank DeFord of Sports Illustrated. Those are my 2 journalistic touchstones. And I met Murray casually once or twice, but I did have a nice, solid acquaintanceship, if not necessarily a close friendship, with Frank DeFord, and that meant a great deal to me.
DeFord wrote this terrific profile in 1981, I believe, of Bobby Knight for Sports Illustrated. And Jim Murray, who was a fan and kind of became a fan again, according to a podcast I did with Paul Page, and you probably recognize that name, Mr. Ryan, the voice of the 500 for so long. But Jim Murray is famous for writing the column about the Indianapolis 500 with the quote, "Gentlemen, start your coffins."
Oh, yes. He had many, but that was his most famous line that people would cite. Absolutely.
Have you ever been to the 500?
I've not been. I'm not interested in auto racing. I've been to 2 Daytonas and of course that we're talking. I've never been to a Formula One or IndyCar race. I've only been to NASCAR races. And that's 4 in general, 2 in New Hampshire, 4 specifically, and 2 Daytonas. And the only reason I went to the 2 Daytonas is the sports reporters program on ESPN emanated 2 years in a row from the 500. And since I was there, how could I tell my boss I don't want to cover the race? So I went down there to do TV and grudgingly covered the race. It just, I feel about car, I'm very simple. I'm not putting anyone down, but I feel that, no, but let me just say to me, you have to love your car to be a fan of auto racing. And I don't love my car. My car has one major purpose, which is it's a large portable radio. And then you hope the brakes are good and the steering wheel works. And heat, that's also important too. Very important, heat. But I don't give a damn about cars, period.
I am with you on cars. I'm not a car person. But you're going to say no, but I will turn over every rock just so you could see the event, the taps, the flyover, the race, the speed, and the fact that on race day, Indianapolis Motor Speedway has one person for every 10,000 Americans. 330,000 people come to that race, and to see that many folks, it's absolutely unbelievable.
I understand what you're saying. And my another one of my colleagues, Lee Montville, who had no great interest in auto racing, but was a connoisseur of events. He went and he got hooked, and starting from scratch. And I've driven by the Speedway, but I've never gone in. I just want to see the golf course.
We can make that. I'll make that happen. Several people from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway have been guests on this podcast, including Mark Miles, who used to run the men's tennis tour. But moving on, you ended up meeting some incredible friends and future sports writers when you did your internship and started your career with sports as a writer. Would you name some of them? I'll prompt you with the first one, and that's Peter Gaines.
Well, the first one literally was the first event that I went to for the Boston Globe was the U.S. Pro Tennis Championships, such as they existed in the pre-Open era in Longwood Country Club not Country Club, Tennis Club in Boston. And Bud Collins is the man. And I would say that Bud Collins is the greatest tennis writer America has ever produced. He's also the greatest tennis and the most ubiquitous person because he was as great a writer as he was a terrific analyst and wound up making his living primarily from television. He left the Globe but he was a great columnist. And he was a mentor to me in my early days at the Globe. So it starts with him. I already made an allusion to Will McDonough, and Will McDonough was a special piece of Americana. I can tell you that. No one had contacts such as Will McDonough that I've ever encountered in various sports. He's known for football, but let me tell you, he had his contacts in baseball, basketball, and hockey as well. And he was a giant in our industry. So it started with those two. And I wound up Peter Gammons, who is a name that very well associated with baseball, and they should. And I started as a summer intern on the same day at the Globe, June 10th, 1968. I walk in, I meet this guy from North Carolina and Groton School. And I was a preppy too at Lawrenceville School. And we hit it off with our mutual love of baseball and basketball and been friends. In fact, I just saw him the night before last, and we've been friends ever since June 10th, 1968.
He looks like he would be an absolute delight to have as a dinner partner.
Now, Peter's terrific. He has more stories and more great baseball contacts. But believe me, he knows more than just baseball. He's a Tar Heel, and how can you go there and not become a basketball guy? And he knew Dean Smith very well. In fact, Dean, he's got plenty of Dean Smith stories for us too.
Is your first assignment? I'm going to say big job, so forgive me if that's ill phrased. But looking through your bio, you were the beat writer for the Boston Celtics for the Boston Globe from 1969 to 1982. Was it when you started? It was the year after the season, after the dynasty ended. Yes. Did you think, why the hell couldn't I have been here 4 or 5 years earlier?
I didn't really. I was just thrilled to get the job. But the way I got it was that I was summer intern in 68, and I was a graduate. And most interns are not. Most interns are undergraduates. But I was graduated, and I also had enlisted in the Army Reserve. It was the height of Vietnam, and I had to go on active duty in October of 68. So when my summer was over, I asked them, can I stick around until I have to go on active duty? And they said, sure. So I covered high school football on weekends for the month of September and into the October. And then I went on my active duty from October 68 to February 69. Came back. They hired me back as an office boy with a verbal promise of the next opening on the staff. Okay. Didn't put it in writing for whatever reason. Fast forward to October, and I'm sitting around minding my own business on a Wednesday. And Fran Rosa, who was a morning sports editor, we had two papers, Morning and Evening Globe, as everybody did in those days, said, you probably thought I forgot all about you, but no, you're going to be on the staff. And by the way, you're covering the Celtics Friday night. What? Opening night. And I hadn't been to an exhibition. I hadn't met anybody. I have a new coach, Tom Heinsohn. I had never covered a professional basketball game. And why me? 23 years old, never covered a game. The guy who had covered the team is the reason I was getting the job, because he left sports to go to news. His name was Bob Sales, and he had covered the team for 5 years, and they had no heir apparent. Apparently, they had no heir apparent. And they probably figured the kid likes basketball, we'll give him a shot, right? There I am, opening night, and it's against the Cincinnati Royals, coached by who else but Bob Cousy, who I had known at BC because I was the play-by-play broadcaster at BC, Boston College, for 4 years, and I had to interact with Coos. I go back to Coos when I was 18 years old, and he's still with us, by the way, age 94 in Worcester, Mass, with 100% of his mental capacity, which is a trade-off I'll take.
We'd love to talk to him so that he can tell Jay Reddick to go to hell.
Oh, I know it, and he would too. Oh, he would be great. Opening night I cover, and that's how I got started. So I covered the team for 7 years. I got worn out emotionally, and I went up in a little bit of a feud with Tom Heinsohn, and I didn't want to face another year of that, and I wouldn't want to be good. So I got off the beat in 76. I was gone for 2 years. Long story short, I come back in 78, and I get there in time to get Larry Bird. And that was a pivotal moment in everything that I've done since, because Larry Bird wound up being the guy I wrote more words about than anybody else. I wound up doing a book with Larry Bird, and so I did that for 4 years. I went to television for, I don't know, did you know this?
Yes, you did, and hated it.
In the summer of 82, the great Ray Fitzgerald, a wonderful columnist and a phenomenal, wonderful person, passed away prematurely of cancer. And I had been led to believe I would be the heir apparent to be the next columnist. But they passed me over, and I was feeling sorry for myself. And at Ray's funeral, my friend Clark Booth from Channel 5 in Boston came up and told me he was leaving his sports job to go to a general, and he would recommend me to take his job in television as a reporter on the local ABC affiliate, Channel 5. And I said, yeah, sure. And I left the Globe thinking I'd never be back. Long story short, and we could talk about TV if you want. But after a year, I realized this wasn't what I want to do. This wasn't me. They were happy with me, and I had a 2-year contract, but this isn't what I want to do. And I wound up going back to the Globe and stayed there until 2012. So I had that. But here's the great thing about that. The great thing about that is you often think about opportunities about, oh boy, the answer was yes, what a great opportunity. Here, the great thing was the answer was no, but no harm, no foul. I was able to go back to what I was doing because they never wanted me to leave the Globe in the first place. And the answer was, I tried it. It wasn't for me. And I had the best opportunity at the best station in town with great people. It just wasn't the life. It wasn't the job. It wasn't the thing that was good suited for me. It's for somebody else. And I found that out with no harm done. That's a great fortune. And I was very fortunate to have that happen.
You are listening to Leaders and Legends, excuse me, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, an Indiana-based public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Garmon Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, one of the best Irish bars in the country, and NFP, a national insurance broker with strong local content. Our guest today is renowned and award-winning sports writer Bob Ryan. You mentioned his name. We have to spend a few minutes on him. Larry Bird. He obviously is as close to a deity as there is here in Indiana. What was it like when he came to Boston? Red Auerbach famously drafted him when he couldn't even play for the Celtics. He had to wait a year. But what was the NBA? What was Boston and the Celtics like? And obviously, we're going to include in all these accolades Magic Johnson, but focusing just on Larry Bird. What was his impact?
Well, his impact was enormous and instantaneous. And he walked into a team that had won 29 games in the 78-79 season. And now he wasn't the only good thing that happened to the team that year. They hired a real coach, Bill Fitch, because Dave Cowens had been anointed as the player coach the year before, and that wasn't working out. Nobody was happy. He wasn't happy. He didn't want to do it. He did it because they asked him to. And we all knew they needed a real coach, and they got Bill Fitch. Secondly, they picked up M.L. Carr from the Pistons, who filled a great void on the team. And thirdly, Tiny Archibald, who had been injured the year before, got healthy. So with all that happening, they went from 29 wins to 60 the first year. And Larry, I had been fortunate enough to have seen Larry play in person the year before. In 1978, the NCAA tournament, Providence College was playing Michigan State in the first round game in Indianapolis on a Saturday afternoon. The night before, Indiana State was hosting Illinois State in an NIT game. I drove out there from Indianapolis to Terre Haute with Mike Madden of the Providence Journal and Jason Stark, a name people might know as the great baseball writer. They both worked for the Providence Journal at the time, and we were friendly. I drove the two of them out there, and we watched the game, and we saw Larry play. The first possession, Illinois State got the tap, went down a shot and missed. Larry got the rebound. He's dribbling up court on the left side of the court, and as he approaches midcourt, he suddenly cocks his right hand back off the dribble and throws an underhand pass 40 feet to Carl Nix for a layup. Never seen it. It was extraordinary. That's the first play I ever saw. Time he ever touched the ball, he had his fallen out of the seat. Okay, so the game goes on. He wins the game He wins the game. Here's the story you'll love. On our way back to Indy, we stopped at a service area, and bad little boys. We picked up a brewski or two. And in fact, I'm sipping at the brewski and see the blue light behind me. Oh my God, I pull over. We were able to ditch the cans before the trooper got there. The trooper says, "You're going a little fast." I said, I'm sorry, officer. We just came back from the ISU game and we're talking and I lost track of what I was doing. He said, "Really? Who won?" I said, "Oh, ISU won." He says, "You boys be careful now and let us go." And that's a true story. And that can be verified by both by Jason and Mike has passed. Anyway, Larry, my first encounter with Larry was doing a story for Us Magazine in the summer of 79, in which the interview was arranged. He wanted it at Bob Wolf's house, his agent, who lived right around the corner from him. And I did the interview with Larry. And one thing he stressed is, I'll do all my obligations with the media, but nobody's ever come into my house, and I don't want them talking to my family and blah, blah, blah. Okay, fine. Set up the ground rules there. Long story short, over the time, Larry mellowed to the point where he welcomed the media. He was raconteur on off days. He figured the whole thing out and used it to his advantage, used the media to make points to the fans. He just became a master manipulator of the media. Yeah, so
no. What about his comment in the '84 series with 50 TV microphones in front of him that quote unquote we just played like a bunch of women?
Oh, well, he said, and they said that we need, after they got beaten game 3, I got routed. He said we need 12 heart transplants.
Yeah, that's right.
He played quote unquote like sissies unquote.
That's right.
And the team they were used to Larry by then. Guess what? The game 4 is one of the epic games of the Celtic history of the playoff. A great overtime win and Larry went for 29-21, and it was a terrific game. And they came back and won that series, as you well know. But long story, getting to know Larry is one of the great pleasures and the most important individual in my career to cover and to enjoy. Here's what I said about Larry. He came along when I was 10 years into my career. And I said, it was as if I had signed up for an art course, but didn't know who the professor would be. And the first day of class, in walked the professor, Michelangelo. And that's the way I felt about Larry. He encompassed everything I loved about basketball, the nature of his game. And there was nobody like him, except, of course, the other guy out on the West Coast, which is the story that, that they're going to be forever linked. They are friends. It's true. Right. It's legit. I can verify this. I spent time with Magic. And by the way, this is a great time to get a plug in. Are you aware of the forthcoming Larry Bird Museum that will be opening in Terre Haute at the end of the spring?
They've covered it a little bit here in India.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm part of the setup deal. I interviewed people for them. And one of them, of course, was Magic. Other one, by the way, is new Hall of Famer Michael Cooper. And that
was the Mutual Admiration Society.
Yes, Larry Bird and I recommended that one. I pushed for that one, and I got to interview Michael Cooper on behalf of his relationship with having covered Larry and all that.
It's always funny to watch, and I want to ask a follow-up question, but it's funny to watch on YouTube to have all of these players, Magic not necessarily, but James Worthy and Michael Cooper and others say, I absolutely hate Larry Bird, but I respect the living hell out of him. Well, like it never changes.
Coop doesn't hate him. I can promise you that. But he's such a wonderful guy. I'm so happy for him. I'm so glad they honored him. To me, he's the Bill Mazeroski of basketball, or Bill Mazeroski is the Michael Cooper of baseball. Their defense is the reason they're in, and it should be. And they both belong in their respective halls of fame. And I'm glad that Mazeroski got in, and I'm glad that Michael Cooper will be going in. So anyway, Larry, it was just an incredible experience and so many great moments. And of course, I went up doing the book with Larry and spending time in French Lick, being there on 3 or 4 different occasions and finding out what it was like to grow up there. And it was just a tremendous experience.
Let me ask you about that. That's interesting. It seems to me that Larry Bird's time in the NBA is experiencing a renaissance, if I should say it correctly, because of all the videos on YouTube about Larry Bird's trash talking. Have you seen any of these videos? And you've obviously heard him or seen him do it up close. What do you think of that? That
I haven't, because I'm not interested, particularly because I think it's overrated. But all right, if everybody wants to harp on it, let them do it. I know some good-natured ones that he came up with. Maybe he was oblivious. It's possible that things were going on that I didn't even know about with Larry in that regard. Very possible. I just know the fun ones, like running by Frank Layden saying one night, "Don't you have anybody who can guard me?" and stuff like that.
It's fun to watch the video of John Lucas laugh. He can barely get it out, laughing about the time that Larry Bird hit a jumper on Robert Reed from the Rockets and said, maybe you should go back to preaching.
Reed was being hyped up as some kind of deterrent. Anytime they did that, like another one was Paul Pressey. And all Larry had to do was post him up, which he did to win a big playoff game. And the one that was for real, only one, Michael Cooper. There was nobody else who was for real. Everybody else was a joke. Let me tell you a little funny one. So when I in 1986, Celtics were playing a game in Hartford, which they played 3 times a year in those days. And before the game, they're playing the Cavaliers. He said, "Who's going to guard me?" I said, "I think Ben McDonald." He goes for 29 in the first half.
What do you make of And this isn't just on YouTube, but it's other places. What do you make of Larry Bird's apparently oft stated comment? Don't put a white guy on me. It's disrespectful.
I think I can believe him saying that. I can believe him saying that. Larry was so respectful of his black brethren and in the league. And absolutely, he figured that he deserved, the least they could do was honor him by putting a legitimate player on him instead of some hokey white guy that's on the bench. Oh, I can totally believe it. And his black brethren would laugh and appreciate that. I certainly hope so.
They sure do. On the videos you watch, they're laughing so hard and all this stuff. Were you there in the game where a Bird scored 60, or had you left by then?
No, that was in New Orleans in 1985, and I was off the beat. That's a long story, not long story, but I remember watching the game, and they played the Hawks were playing home away from home. They weren't drawing well in those days. They played a few games a year in different places, and they were at Lakefront Coliseum, Lakefront Arena in New Orleans. And the game starts off, and he's off this phenomenal start. And I remember my wife was upstairs in the bedroom, and I yelled up, "You better come see this! Larry's going crazy!" And so I remember watching the game. Yeah, and the backstory, and that's the perfect story.
The Kevin McHale backstory.
That was March 12th. On March 3rd, 1985, on a Sunday afternoon, Kevin McHale went for 56 points, which was the new Celtic scoring record, including playoffs. The record was 54 by Havlicek in a playoff game. And he did so by torching a guy that Larry hated, Kent Benson, speaking of Hoosiers.
Yeah.
And he was feeding Kevin, and because Benson finally fouled out, we think on purpose.
Because Benson was a jerk to Bird during that short time he was at IU.
And his month in Bloomington.
Mm-hmm.
So Larry delighted in feeding Kevin, and finally Benson fouls out, and we think he did it on purpose. Kevin once fouled out on purpose, by the way. He didn't want to play against Edgar Jones. That's another story. But
the Edgar Jones? Is that the helicopter?
And it's the one from Nevada, Reno. And anyway,
Sorry.
So Larry tells Kevin, and I verified this with Kevin and with Larry, that you should have gone for 60.
Yeah.
So Kevin held the Celtic scoring record for 9 days. And Larry gets to 60 on the 12th of March and knocks Kevin out of the record books.
Is that the great, had Kobe Bryant scoring 80 some, and then in the 70s, David Thompson and George Gervin and all that. But is that the greatest shooting exhibition you've ever seen? Bird scoring 60 because, he's not getting a bunch of dunks?
To go that high, yeah, and he had one in particular that they cite, and you can see the video when he made one right in front of the Hawks bench, and a couple of guys fell right off the bench and mock. And it's one thing if your teammates do it, but when that happens and it was the opponents who did it, because we see guys go crazy with dunks and alley-oops and stuff, and bench going crazy, and everybody, or when some sub hits a three, they all go crazy. But this was the other team that was reacting in complete respectful awe of what Larry had just done to them. So it probably was. You
wrote a book called Drive. You co-authored with Larry Bird. Drive, The Story of My Life, came out in 1989. What's it like to write a book with Larry Bird, who just seems like he is so reserved? He's so organized. You go to spend a week at Larry Bird's house and you has at his pool, he's got like a little cabana house. It's like not a glorified shed, but comfortable. And you sit there and you interview Larry on the tape recorder with all your hardworking preparation. And you do this every day for a week with 1 day exception. And the exception was that he had the commitment to go to Louisville to participate in a golf outing. And it was with the Gaines brothers, who had opened up a new golf course called Valhalla. And their goal was someday we're going to get a major. Guess what, folks? Where are we going to be in the end of February, May this year? Anyway, and you do it. That's how you do a book with somebody. I did with Havlicek, sitting on the banks of the Olentangy doing that, and literally sitting on the banks of the Olentangy River with my tape recorder. So that's what you do. And then you go back and you have it transcribed, and you try to write the thing in his voice, as doing as much verbatim as you possibly can. And that's the way you do those books. Was Bird a specific challenge? No, Havlicek was, I had to pull stuff out of him harder. I wish I had done a better job
I mean, it was fine, but I figured what I came out with John was a high-class kids book.
Yeah.
That was my first attempt at it. I had done Bob Cousy as well, so that was something. But Larry, he was good and he was fun, and obviously I enjoyed every bit of it. And
Go ahead.
no, that's fine. It's good. He told me there were two things. There were two off topics. One was the fight with
Dr. J.
And the other was his fight in the bar in Boston and Chelsea's, where had a settlement, and therefore he wasn't going to get involved. Those were the two. But the one topic I didn't know if he had publicly addressed it much before, that I wasn't sure he would be willing to talk about, was his father's suicide.
Right.
And he did address that in detail, and also his first marriage, his short-lived first marriage, and he addressed both the topics.
I remember watching the fight between Larry Bird and Dr. J. Why do you think he's so reluctant to talk about it?
I think he was embarrassed. I think he first of all, they had done commercials. Yeah, they were
Converse commercials. They were buddies.
But I think he was embarrassed, and that got to that. And when Dr. J retired, the Celtics gave him the traditional piece of the parquet, and Larry is the one who presented it to him. There's no hard feelings in the end of that. I'm just guessing. I know I didn't ask him specifically why. I just going along with the program. I didn't even.
And Dr. J has been, very generous in his praising of Larry Bird's game. Called him a basketball genius.
He was the first conquered superstar in the Larry Bird list of conquests. First of all, he was at his peak fame in Philly. His first exhibition game was in New York against Philadelphia and Dr. J. And he was the first milestone that Larry had, the first guy who's got to be measured up to. How's he going to measure up against a fellow great forward? And the first one that he had to show the world he was every bit as equal or superior was Dr. J.
There's a whole lot of ink, characters, video spilt in the ubiquitous GOAT discussion, no matter what the sport is. In basketball, is there going to be a true discussion that doesn't involve Larry Bird? Or is it just Michael Jordan and then there's a bunch of...
Well, there shouldn't be. I understand that, first of all, the individual defensive thing. Larry was a good team defensive player, and he had his moments. And I can tell you that he was a very difficult guy to go against in the last few minutes of a game because he really dug in. You got to be serious about that Michael was a better defensive player. Here's the thing why I want Larry in the discussion. Larry Bird did something that neither, Michael, certainly not Michael, and to a certain extent, LeBron, who's the other great passing forward, obviously, and no one else on their level. Unless you want to consider Doncic a forward. I don't know what Doncic is. He's a new breed of... No, we have these new hybrid guys.
Yeah.
Okay, so anyway, Larry Bird could truly dominate substantial periods of games without taking a shot. And Michael couldn't do that. Michael had to shoot the ball.
You posted that on X, as I can't recall.
But here's the thing. And here's the thing that separates Larry from LeBron. And it's just so simple. And it's so obvious. When I tell it to you, you're going to go, of course. Larry Bird got more done than any player in the history of basketball in fewer moments with the ball in his hands. Larry Bird, unlike LeBron, who brings it up, dribbles it 5 trillion times because he's got the ball all the time. Larry did not have the ball all the time. Larry Bird had figured out 2 steps in advance what he was going to do with the ball if he happened to get it, or he knew where certain people were going to be at the right time. And he had fewer touches to get his assists than anybody in history. This is unarguable. That's to me, if you're going to finally find a thing to separate him from everybody who's ever played the game, that's it. I'll hang my hat on that. You're not going to change my mind. There's never been a player who got more done with the ball in his hands less than Larry Bird.
We have a few more minutes with award-winning and much respected and classic Twitter, we'll call it, raconteur, Bob Ryan. What's your favorite sports movie?
I would say it probably is Hoosiers, and I'm not saying that just because of who I'm speaking to, but it probably is. I like the League of Their Own a lot, but I always hated that line about there's no crying in baseball. I just didn't like that part of it, and that's the thing that everybody cites, including now it's a new commercial I just saw last night citing that. Anyway, but Hoosiers, and my favorite thing is when they're sitting in the barbershop and the new coach, and they're telling him, we like zone defense. Or was it the opposite? That was the defense line. Mm-hmm. Here's the thing about it. I thought the authenticity of so many things. When that movie came out, Jerry Seasting was playing for the Celtics. Jerry Seasting from Martinsville, Indiana.
Right.
Where John Wooden had coached. Okay. He said, tell me about the movie. And he said, it's really good. And he said, the caravan scene, he said, is the gospel, is the truth. That is the gospel truth. And so with that endorsement, I went to see the movie, and certainly I loved the whole thing. And so I would have to say that would be it.
Do you consider Rocky a sports movie?
Yeah, I do. Rocky's very good. And because I have so many vignettes about Rocky, of course, and couldn't drink in the egg milk. I wouldn't be drinking the egg milk. I can tell you that right now. I love using the carcasses as punching bags was cool. Yeah. There's a lot of things to remember there. Here's the thing about that night. I saw that movie won the Oscar the same day that Al McGuire and Marquette won the NCAA tournament.
Oh, beating North Carolina. And
that was a Monday night in 1977. And I saw it from Winter Haven, Florida, on my first spring training with the Boston Red Sox. So Al McGuire and Sylvester Stallone were forever linked in my memory.
Is there a person who in sports history who you would have loved to have interviewed who you didn't? You can go all the way back to Babe Ruth if you want. Just somebody you're like, man, I'd love to pick his brain.
I'll tell you the one I wish I had seen in his prime, and that's DiMaggio, because of all the descriptions about the grace and the perfect player kind of thing. I would love to have seen him. Interview, not necessarily. I'm trying to, I guess maybe Dizzy Dean. That'd be fun. Or some of those old timers would be interesting. Christy Mathewson, who was the college boy in an era when nobody else was a college boy, but Christy Mathewson from Bucknell, that kind of thing. And there are a few others around, Eddie Collins, but I'm not necessarily, I'm just trying to think of any coaches.
Casey Stengel?
Oh, the old professor. Yeah. Now that would have been fun. I guess hanging around with Casey was a real hoot.
Branch Rickey or
the Manhattan,
Jackie Robinson.
Of course, Jack. Yeah, Branch Rickey. He was a little pompous, I think, but a little bit of Mahatma, but certainly very interesting. Oh, I tell you, let me tell you my favorite interview though. That I did interview someone I cherish, and I still have the notebook with the transcript when I interviewed. I had a 3-hour session with Bill Veeck. Sitting outside in the courtyard of his apartment in the south side of Chicago. And oh boy, is that a thrill. Was that something? He was famously in the phone book. And I had 3 hours with Bill Veeck. I cherish that.
Love it. Love it. Is there a sporting event you didn't cover that you wish you had covered?
You know what it is? And it was the old days, though, at Rosenblatt Stadium, the College Baseball World Series. And always was up against the NBA Finals. And I couldn't extricate myself to get to the College Baseball World Series. But I had an affinity for it. When I was a junior at Boston College, we actually went. And for the last time we won a game. We beat Ryder, and we lost to Arizona State, who, by the way, had a pitching staff with 3 different pitchers who had each won more games than we had won as a team. It tells you about the disparity between New England baseball and Arizona baseball at the time. Yeah, that's the one I always cite. Other than that, no.
Is there an event that you wish you had seen? And I ask this question a lot, and then we're going to get to the final 5 questions I ask everyone. But sometimes when folks have come on more than once, or I'm writing a story for the local news for the Indy Star or whatever about it, is there a sporting event you wish you had witnessed just as a fan? I can tell you, George Will's answer was Bill Mazeroski in 60, I believe.
1960, off of Ralph Terry.
Yeah, and the current governor of Indiana, Eric Holcomb, who I've known for a long time, I asked him, and he said the Thrilla in Manila. Just to be there as a fan. And of course, they both asked me what I'd see, and I said, there's no way I could pass up being at the Miracle on Ice.
Okay, yeah, boy, that's a good one. And we all have our stories where we were for that one, and I know exactly where I was when that was going on, and it was many miles away. Something just flashed into my head. I was going to give you, my initial answer was going to be Bill Walton's 21 for 22 in 1973 in the finals. And then suddenly, because I grew up as a Giant fan, New York Giants, and it still is the most famous home run in baseball history. October 3rd, 1951. And the only problem is if you're there, you don't hear Russ Hodges' call.
Yeah.
Giants win the pennant. The Giants win the pennant. But that would have been pretty cool because it's since been disparaged because of sign stealing. But I say this, I don't care if he knew that pitch was coming. It was around his neck. And I still hear Ralph Branca say, it was a bad high inside fastball. And it was up around his neck. He may have known it was coming, but still you have to handle a very difficult pitch to hit. And it was a culmination of the greatest pitch stretch run in baseball history, the Giants winning 37 of their last 44 games. Yeah, we found out that there may have been a little chicanery involved, but we didn't know that at the time. You were blissfully ignorant of that. And I think maybe I would have liked to have been at that game.
We mentioned a little bit rivalries. We talked Celtics and Lakers. And then, of course, we've talked some Indianapolis sports here because that's where I'm sitting. But where does the Tom Brady, Patriots, Peyton Manning, Colts rivalry, where does that rank for you in those games?
That was a lot of fun. And I'm trying to think. We've got rivalries here. We think of the Bruins and Canadians over the years. And when they went that long drought from 1943 to 70, whatever it was, before they finally beat them, that was huge. The frustration there was enormous because this is very much a hockey town. You have that. Of course, we had Birdman, Yankees, Red Sox, 04. To finally break the quote unquote curse in the manner they did was almost worth the wait because it was at the expense of the Yankees and the way it was done. And you think you go from 19-8 in game 3 and down 0-3 and despair and doom and gloom, nothing but that around here. And 11 nights later, they're drinking the champagne in St. Louis. Okay, Brady and Manning. Yeah, because, and yet Peyton, to me, was likable. It was like there was no personal, it was likable. You hated him because he was an efficient villain on the other team. But was he really a villain? I don't think so. Russell and Chamberlain, that was a white hat, black hat thing for us here in Boston with Wilt. And although Wilt was actually a very nice guy. And
they say but Billy Cunningham says he was too nice. They go, if even Kuzi said if he had the heart that Russell had, he would have been even more awesome, but he was just too nice a guy.
Next time, why don't we just do the hour on Russell and Chamberlain? That'd be fine with me. But no, with football, 20 years ago, if someone told you that we would have a discussion involving a football rivalry in this town as being worthy of discussion at the top, we would have laughed because it didn't happen. This is just all is so organic happening with this Patriots run. But it was important. It was very big. Although I just don't think quarterback versus quarterback. In the end, they're not competing against you. They're competing against the defense. You're not competing against. It's not like Magic and Larry. It's not like Wilt and Russell. It's not like pitcher batter necessarily. But certainly it was important.
What are your thoughts? This goes back quite a while, so forgive me, but I wrote it down in my notes. Looking back, is the 1975 World Series the greatest of all time?
It certainly was a tremendous World Series. I think I'm going to pull a little check out 1912 sometime. And it ended up in a 12-inning eighth game. And in a brief period of time when it was a best of 9. That series was extraordinary. But this one, I lived through it. Naturally, I covered home games only. I was in between. I was very much still covering the Celtics, but I did all home games, and my job was the visiting clubhouse. So after
you were there because the Reds won it. Yeah, the Reds
with Pat Zachary. Yeah, so that
were you in the visitors' locker room after they won 4-3 in Game 7?
Yes. Yeah, I was. So I was there. That was my job. But that series. Oh yeah, there were so many things, including Louis Tiant's first opening game against them. He was at the peak of his fame then and glory, having beaten the A's in the playoffs.
Red Sox won the first game 6-0, and as a 7-year-old kid, I thought this was going to be history. And oops.
Then of course, but Game 6 was obviously the game that everybody knows. So anyway, it was a very important. It focused a lot of attention on baseball. I think it was very important for baseball.
Bob Ryan is the Pontifex Maximus of the Baseball Hall of Fame. Do you induct Pete Rose?
Now, yes, because baseball has sold its soul to gambling. And I said this immediately when I realized with baseball, I was completely in agreement with keeping him out. You walked into every clubhouse in 2 languages. It tells you about the prohibitions about gambling. He did it. He lied. He did. And I say to people, and this is a thing that'll be true to the day. And by the way, happy birthday, Pete. 83 today, right?
Correct.
His birthday today, as we speak. Pete Rose may, in fact, love baseball more than anybody on this earth. Problem is, he loves gambling more. And I have seen no evidence that's not still the case. However, once baseball took this disgusting turn that it's taken, and all sports have, into partnership with gambling and all its attendant ills, and we're seeing them manifest themselves already, I said, I'll pick him up and drive him to the airport. I'll drive him to Cooperstown myself. They have forfeited the high moral ground. They forfeited it. So he goes in. But I was under the old rules. No.
Of all the sports people I grew up with as a kid, to have my father, my mother not necessarily, but my father talk about, my dad was born in New Jersey in 1936. God rest your soul, Dad. Nobody received the deification treatment from my father more than Ted Williams. Mm-hmm. What are your memories of Ted Williams and his interactions with the press, which are almost as it's the most, I always said, the most inevitable friendship in the history of the world is Ted Williams and Bobby Knight.
By the time I came around, my first personal encounter with Ted Williams was as manager of the Washington Senators. And in that capacity, he was a delight to interview. You go into his office before the game and ask baseball questions and get terrific answers and observations. And he was completely cordial. I believe that by and large, that you would have that opinion, or that confirmed by anybody who covered baseball in those days. I was completely not around when he was playing from 1939 to 1960 and all whatever things were happening. And I did have executive sports editor named Jerry Nason, who used to tell me, he had a decent relationship with him, and you had to do certain things. I don't know what, but yeah. But the story, you realize when Ted was a rookie in 1939, not only did he speak to the press, he took his hat off and waved it to the fans, and he got embittered because things were written in the winter is either 40-41, I believe, or I don't think it was the very first year, and about stupid things were written by some columnists in town, including why didn't he go home to visit his mother, or some stupid crap like that. Mm-hmm. And that was it. He got angry. And then there was a couple of people, there was one guy in Boston in particular that took it upon himself to be the contrarian and said that he got all these RBIs, but they weren't important, or something stupid stuff. You never got it when you mattered, kind of thing. And the fact that he had the great All-Star game in 46 for 4 and 2 home runs and hit the ball off the Ephus pitch off Rip Sewell, and then, that's an All-Star game. That doesn't matter. And then they had these numbers about, one guy had to think about the 10 most important games of his life he hit, and what did he hit, like 200. And then in 46 in the World Series, when he was injured, got hit on a pitch on his elbow in this manufactured exhibition game before the World Series started, because they had so much time off. And he hit too high. Yes, he was 5 for 20 with no extra base hits. He had a bad elbow, and everybody should know it. So anyway.
And am I wrong in remembering this? I know when he hit 406, he didn't win the MVP because DiMaggio did in 41. But Ted Williams won the Triple Crown twice and didn't receive the MVP award either time?
No, the one year is because somebody put him 9th and 10th on the ballot, and another year someone left the ballot off the ballot and completely. Yeah, I guess 42 it was that Joe Gordon, and then 47 it was probably DiMaggio. I don't know. And 40, but it disgraced. That's pettiness beyond belief. The one and then of course he's very celebrated for having served twice in the war, and he went in reluctantly both times. But once he got there, he was there. He was the sole support of a single mother. Right. In 42, he didn't enlist, and he was in the reserves, and he was very angry when they called him up. He thought it was unnecessary in the Korean War, but he was a hell of a pilot. And of course, his buddy was John Glenn, and who testified to his skills as a pilot. And Ted, he certainly used that as that service to defend himself, and he should. He was a great member of our armed forces. There's no question.
So how would you answer the following question? Then I promised to end this interview very quickly so you can have lunch. And I'm very sorry. I've got so much more I'd love to talk to you about. So the famous saying is, if you're going to pay player X this much money in whatever year, how much would Williams and DiMaggio and Mantle and Gehrig and Ruth and Gibson and
Yep.
Warren Spahn, Stan Musial, of course.
Yep.
How much would they be worth?
If you're talking about, we're already up in the 30s and 40s, and they're talking about somebody, Soto, maybe going to the 50 million. Somebody's going to get there. Of course, almost all the names of Ted Williamson, DiMaggio,
Willie
Mays, Mantle, Aaron, of course, those three for sure. Koufax, if he had been healthy and had enough to have a career, would still the best pitcher of my lifetime. I think at his peak was, I would say. And yeah, it's the inflation thing. Look, let's just put it in perspective. Williams and DiMaggio were the first $100,000 ball players. Okay,
right,
going back to the late 40s, early 50s. Russell and Chamberlain were the first $100,000 basketball players, and the famous line from Russell, and this is the gospel truth: Wilt got 100, and Russell got himself paid 100,001.
I love it.
Okay. Pete Rose was the first, quote, $100,000 singles hitter by his proclamation. This is where we're coming from, folks, if you're a bit on the younger side and you're so used to this 7 figures and 8 figures and 9 figures of today. This is where we're coming from. So there's no way of knowing for sure, but you rest assured that the names that we've just mentioned would have been commanding 30, 40, 50 million.
The last name I want to mention, because we talked a little bit about the same subject, alluded to it earlier in the program, about recently deceased people who fans like me know and enjoyed. Chris Mortensen.
I didn't know him well, but I did, and he was liked by all and respected. And nobody's perfect. Everybody makes a mistake. And when you're an insider, when you're an informant, when you're the information guy, you're dependent on things people tell you.
Right.
And you have to decide whether or not there's a validity and whether they're telling you the truth. And you can get stung. There's none of us who have not been stung in some, whether it's TV or print, by somebody telling us something which turned out not to be true for whatever reason, whether it was an outright lie or it was a misconception or subsequent events overtook it and made it rendered it invalid. And so anyway, so there's people have cited something or other. I forget which one it was on him, but
it doesn't matter.
No, the fact is he was a tribute. He's a great person for his business. And obviously his colleagues admired him and liked him, and he's a loss.
What did you think when your buddy Bob Kravitz broke Deflategate?
My thing about Deflategate is you can break it, but it was the most overblown nonsense. Given that, and this is irrefutable, the final score was what? 45-10? Whatever it was. Right. He threw the ball better the next second half than the first half with the alleged phony ball. Period.
I feel like I'm on Sports Reporters.
He threw the ball better, so that renders the whole thing nonsense. And the other thing is the excessive penalty that was handed out was for a very simple reason. That was to punish Belichick for all his transgressions, previous transgressions, real or imagined, and it was to mollify the other 31 owners, to make them happy, period. It was like giving somebody 20 years to life for jaywalking. And that's what I think. Doesn't mean you shouldn't report if you find out, but don't put any. Once you report it, you go, but by the way, this is a bunch of nonsense. And it was.
I'm a Dolphins fan, so it didn't affect me. I do think the world of Bob Kravitz, for sure. We've reached the point in the Leaders and Legends podcast where we ask the same 5 questions of all of our guests. Mr. Bob Ryan, are you ready?
I trust I am. I hope I am.
What was your first job?
My first real job was as a camp counselor in the summer of 1962, having spent the previous summer at 5 weeks at the Lawrenceville School Camp in North Jersey, camp for underprivileged kids from New York City and Trenton, New Jersey. I worked the whole summer of 62 for the princely sum of $250, which I thought was a tremendous. What am I going to do with $250? That was my first job.
What was your first concert?
First concert. Yeah, concert. That's a good question. I think there was a rock and roll concert in New Haven, Connecticut that my friends, a couple of friends and I went to. Concert. I can tell you what my cherished first venue club was Lenny's on the Turnpike in Danvers, Mass. To see Buddy Rich and his orchestra. I had been in Buddy Rich is my all-time. He's one of my holy trinity of musicians. The other two being Zoot Sims and Count Basie himself as a piano player. And Zoot Sims, of course, is a tenor saxophone player. So anyway, but concerts, I wasn't a big concert goer, still aren't, but I love going to venues. I'm very friendly with John Pizzarelli Jr. now. We were like junkies. We go see him everywhere, but a great guitarist and singer. So anyway, there was a rock and roll concert that we saw in New Haven. The best book to read of the last 30 years was Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. And for me, that's the easy leader in the clubhouse. And I've read all kinds of books on different subjects of sports and politics and entertainment. But the book that I just wished had gone on for 1,000 pages, that's really the way you judge a book in the end. How aren't you sorry when it's over? And don't you wish there was so much more? And Lonesome Dove is the answer.
This question may be even more difficult for you, Bob, because you are a history major. If you could witness any event in history, be there in person as it happens, which event would you choose? Non-sports.
Yeah, I know. I'm thinking, oh boy, I'm trying to think of, because generally speaking, you think of negative events first and rather than positive events. And so I don't know. I'm trying to think. Wow, that's a good one. One, maybe people recognize this. How about the signing of the truce at Appomattox? And
April 9th.
And knowing that the dreadful war was over. And now, second, I wouldn't mind being on the USS Missouri at the end of World War II either, but I like Appomattox. I'll go with that.
When I get asked, I go on other podcasts, and a lot of times they ask me my 5 questions. And when they ask me that, that's what I say, the surrender at Appomattox.
Oh, wow. Great minds. You know what they say.
Last question. If you could have dinner with anyone living today, 2 hours off the record, just to chat, whom would you choose?
Quincy Jones. Quincy Jones is an astonishingly singular figure in the history of American music. His tentacles extend from Sinatra unto Sands, and before that to Michael Jackson, to you name it. He is the most. I've always said I wish the late Whitney Bayet of New Yorker, the great jazz critic, had written about a profile of Quincy Jones. I would love to say, go stroll down memory lane with Quincy Jones. Oh, by the way, the guy who orchestrated "We Are the World." By the way,
yes,
he was like the general manager. He put it together. He heard it. He took care of all the egos. So there's my answer, Quincy Jones.
And brought in Eddie Van Halen for "Beat It" completely out of the blue. Just picked up the phone and called him. That's a very unique and very cool answer for sure. You have been listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, an Indiana-based public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Garmon Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and NFP, a national insurance broker with strong local content. As always, all our podcast interviews are dedicated to the legacy and generosity of P.E. McAllister. And Bob, that name probably doesn't ring a bell with you, but he was one of the founding fathers of modern Indianapolis, and also remembered listening to the 27 Yankees on the radio. Bob Ryan, this has been such a treat for me. Thank you so very much. I've enjoyed every second of it. Very grateful for you to come on the Leaders and Legends podcast. And please stay active on Twitter, X, whatever it's called. I love to read your commentary. Very grateful.
All right, I'm going to leave you with a parting shot. Indianapolis should be the permanent site of the NCAA Men's Basketball Championship.
I second that. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Bob.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much for listening to Leaders and Legends, brought to you by Veteran Strategies Incorporated. If you want to contact us about this program or our menu of public relations services, please send us an email at robert@veteranstrategies.com. That's robert@veteranstrategies.com.